Hi everyone and welcome. I am very pleased today to be joined by Einar Tangen, senior fellow at the Teihe Institute, founding partner at the Center for China and the World at City University of Macau, and also the chairman of Asia Narratives. So great to have you back on the program.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So yeah, what I wanted to discuss with you today was obviously the economic war, but also yeah, what it all means because the United States obviously put tariffs not just on China but the world, and then in different cases reversed or paused these tariffs, with the exception of Britain, where they actually reached an agreement. But to focus first on the U.S.-China negotiations. What do you make of these negotiations? This because it was for some it appeared that Trump folded, and at the same time he claimed victory, and indeed many on journalists are also claiming, and politicians are claiming this was a victory as well. Because how do you read this situation?
Well, I mean, let's go back to the beginning. Donald Trump has tried the tariffs before. They didn't work terribly well. Then he did a phase one, and then the phase one fizzled. And this time around, he decided to fly this kind of broadside. He targeted only 180 countries, given that we only have 195, if you include the Holy See and a few others. It was basically declaring war on the world, including his closest neighbors, allies, as well as competitors and other people he just didn't care about. I mean, the penguins, they're very mystified as to why they have tariffs on them. But this was, apart from being a little strange. It seemed to lack any kind of real end game. Now it appears that he was thinking that if he fired this, that he was showing people he was very powerful, and that he could force people into this kind of new paradigm that he wants to create, which is America at the hub. And then America uses its superior political, economic, and military might to, in essence, create these bilateral, unequal bilateral relationships with other countries where they're, in essence, forced to become, basically part of the United States, although they don't get to vote. They would be just subject nations to propping up the United States. Well, the problem with what Trump is trying to do is that trade flows are measured by everybody: IMF, World Bank, ADB, every country. And they're looking at his cards, and he's insisting that he has a royal straight flush, which in poker is the highest hand. And everyone's looking at his cards going, no, you don't. But smaller and medium-sized countries do not have the wherewithal to go toe to toe with the United States. So people were trying to figure out what to do. Now, in the midst of this, China said, I'm calling your bluff. You just don't have it. And they knew that the pressure was not so much directly from China, but simply because the American public had elected Donald Trump to reduce prices, not to increase them. They're very concerned. Over 70% of American families felt that they were living paycheck to paycheck before the election. And many of them thought that even though they didn't particularly like Donald Trump, they didn't have any faith in Kamala Harris to deal with the economic situation. After all, she was basically just following the playbook that Joe Biden was preaching, saying that everything's great, don't worry about it. Well, Americans were worrying about it. Credit card defaults, uh, bankruptcies, people losing their home, their cars. This was happening, and people were very, very concerned. So they went with Donald Trump. He said, I'm going to show you victory. Remember, golden age, all this type of thing. In actuality, it isn't working out that, because when China said no, all of a sudden there's a complete sea change in how it was working. Now, remember, this isn't the first 90-day reset. He paused it for 90 days before because of the reaction of the bond markets. Now, there's the second part. The first part is, your consumers, average American, is being hurt by higher prices. And that's going to lead to a downward economic spiral because as higher prices go, people spend less, less people are employed. Then there's the other problem of American debt. Donald Trump he loves debt. He just doesn't like to repay it. And so far, he hasn't put forward a plan to take care of America's 36 and growing trillion deficit. In fact, by the end of this year, it'll be 38 trillion. And questions about that debt have already been voiced. 2011, you had S&P downgrade the United States. 2023, you had Fitch do it, and now Moody's just this week has indicated that they're downgrading the United States from AAA to AA1. Now, is that going to affect America in the long run? Yes and no. The problem is if no one has faith in the US dollar and the system, I'm not going to buy bonds. The people who do buy bonds are going to insist on a higher interest rate. So the first reset was because the bond market was reacting very negatively. And if the interest rates go up, the amount of money that the United States has to pay for its debt is going to sharply increase. So he has two realities facing him. Unpopular with the public because prices are rising, and he's facing a potentially crippling amount of interest. Last year, the U.S. paid out $1 trillion. That's out of a $6 trillion budget. And out of that $6 trillion, $2 trillion were borrowed. So it's actually borrowing more than its interest payment. If it was any other country, they would say that it was a Ponzi scheme. You're borrowing money to pay back the money you've already borrowed, plus you're borrowing even more. I mean, this has Bernie Madoff beat because he's doing it openly. So with these two pressures on him, when it came to China, and China said, no, we're not going to do that, he had to, in essence, have his bluff called. Question is what to do. And in typical Donald Trump style is you retreat and declare victory. And that's exactly what he's done. And other people are saying, well, China's paying 30% tariffs and we're only paying 10%. Well, that's nonsense. China isn't paying a dime. Tariffs, goods come into the United States and whoever imported them is going to be charged that 30%. And that 30%, a large portion of it, is going to be shouldered by the American public. So it doesn't solve that problem. And it helps with the bonds, but it doesn't solve it either because there's no plan to pay it all back or to significantly reduce it. So right now we're in a reset period, 90 days. They're supposed to come up with a mechanism that allows them to interact, in a civilized way. Now you'll note, pay attention to this, that instead of going to, having people come to Mar-a-Lago and get on their knees and beg him and then be ridiculed after they left, like the former prime minister of Canada, Trudeau, or going to Washington, like the Japanese did, and saying, okay, what do you want? And the answer coming back from Trump himself, what are you prepared to offer? Well, Japan wasn't interested in bidding against itself, so it went back to Tokyo, and they said, this is going to be a long, drawn-out affair because they don't want to say what they want, and we're not going to start the bidding against ourselves. So into this, China has said, no, we're not going to Washington. We're not going to Mar-a-Lago. We want you to go to Geneva, neutral space, except that neutral space is the home of the World Trade Organization, an organization the U.S. has basically sabotaged, in which China wants to promote. And not only did they, have the negotiations there, forcing the U.S. to come out of the U.S., but they also made a report directly and very publicly to the head of the WTO. Of course, was delighted to hear that there was going to be some sort of order. But, this trade mechanism, what does it mean? Well, it doesn't mean much if positions haven't changed. And China has made it very clear they're not going to buckle or they're give in to the kind of bullying that they perceive Donald Trump is doing. So if you ask me, I would say that the plan is what they call a phase two. And the reason I say phase two is phase one, I referred to it earlier. This was when China agreed to buy a lot of energy and agriculture products from the United States. It was interrupted by COVID, never completed. But in a white paper that was delivered about 3.5 weeks ago by the Chinese government, they had 6 points. One of those points was talking about the failure of phase one. Very interesting. Why would you be talking about something that you saw as a failure unless it was an invitation to do a phase two? Now, and then the question is, why would China be interested in a phase two? Well, they see Trump, and I think most people do, as transactional, which means if you give him something today, he will be back tomorrow and saying, I want something else. This was proven to both Mexico and Canada. Remember, it was Donald Trump who negotiated when they pulled out of the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. He insisted on negotiating an unequal deal with both Canada and Mexico. And now he's going back on the very deal that he made with them and saying, that's not enough. I want more. So China's goal on having a phase two is to tie him to the deal. Because, agriculture products will be, basically bought on a weekly, monthly basis. And if Donald Trump pulls out of what he agrees to, they will simply end the phase two and we'll be back exactly where we started from. The goal here is not to set a grand, some sort of grand bargain with the United States. It's simply to last for the next 3.5 years with Donald Trump. And it's not just China that's affected by these tariffs. And China would like to have a world order where it all goes back to no tariffs or to very, very targeted tariffs that can be justified based on some sort of domestic policy that has meaning. And so that's where I think we are today. China is waiting and seeing if the US is going to go with this. They do not want to corner Trump. They have to be the adults in the room. It would be lovely for many people in Beijing to just watch Donald Trump implode with these dual pressures of the debt and his own base rebelling against his increased prices. And China realizes there's a global system at stake. So they're trying their best to do something that allows a breathing space until Donald Trump is gone and replaced, hopefully, by somebody who's a little bit more reasonable.
Yeah, the idea that they don't want to break America. What is interesting is when Trump gave an interview about pulling back on the tariffs, he argued that the Chinese would have been broken, and this is not a good thing if it would have continued. So somehow this was, to their benefit. I I agree with your criticism of Trump fueling all this unpredictability. What is interesting though is this um, is the absence of a plan, and this is not only about Trump. I think this is indeed why Trump is in power to begin with, because people also before he was elected saw that this obviously was not sustainable. The debt keeps increasing, the standard of living becomes more difficult, and instead of having politicians and journalists who discuss what are the realities, what are possible pathways from here, they saw their main job as being defending the government, pretending, well, everything here is fine. He's not senile. We're not, we're not going for bankruptcy. Our best days are ahead of us. So I think there's no alternative. And then Trump comes along, and I think people roll the dice on this because at least I think to his credit, he recognized a lot of the weaknesses and things weren't sustainable. But thereafter, I very much agree with you. I don't think any of what he's implemented, any of his ideas, they don't really make much sense. Indeed, you refer to these penguins, and this is a reference to why he put tariffs there, because he looks at territories where there's not a trade surplus, and he says, well, then we need reciprocal tariffs. But reciprocal tariffs, you imply that you're matching their tariffs, doing the same. But this is not how we calculated it, though. How are these tariffs made up? Is it It's just, isn't it just if you have a trade deficit, the other side is trading more, then you are, yeah, putting tariffs on them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's go back to where the root of the problem is. I mean, the popular narrative that everyone in Washington likes to spread is that somehow all the jobs were stolen from the U.S. by other countries, and that's just flat out wrong. All right, what happened is the U.S. dollar is the backbone of the trading system, but that increases the value of the dollar. The dollar is more valuable. People are constantly buying dollars and using them for trade settlement, and that pushes the value of the dollar up, which is great if you're trying to, keep this large amount of borrowing going because your interest rates are very low because people are buying. So a strong dollar is great for debt for the United States. But on the other hand, a strong dollar means it's much cheaper to buy from somebody else, right? Because if you make it in the US at a strong dollar, who's going to buy it from you? And, you not only have a strong dollar, you have a differential in terms of labor rates. The labor rates for instance, in India versus the United States for manufacturing, Indian rate is 1/33rd. It's 3%. All right. So if you pay somebody $100 in a day, in India, you pay them $3. If it was in China, you'd pay them $20. So there is huge difference in the amount of money you have to pay for labor. So the combination of this made sure, American companies had to leave and go find cheaper places to manufacture because if they didn't, Europe would. Europe was America's main peer competitor. They sell airplanes, we sell airplanes, they sell the medical equipment, we sell the medical equipment, and all of these types of things. And so they were forced in this situation, and they were quite happy to do so because it fattened the bottom line. Trillions of dollars in profits since 2001 have flowed into the coffers of American business, but hasn't been distributed, not to the workers. If you start looking at wage increases, it's been basically flat during that period of time, slight increase in the last few years. But because it was flat, people's actual living has gone down. And how do we know this? Well, in 1971, which was predates, of course, 1991, but 2001, there was this 61% of Americans were middle class. Fast forward to last year, they did a study on median income, and they discovered that only 40% of Americans are now middle class. Now, there has been some increase to upper middle class, but it hasn't been 21%. So basically, you've seen the impoverishment of America. And Americans at the local level realize this. This is why they're angry. They feel the government and the system that is supposed to represent them and take care of them has been doing nothing except for these big fat cats. Now let's switch back to corporations. Huge profits. Did the government, a government is supposed to look out for everybody. It would have made a lot of sense to say to these guys, okay, we're going to have to tax you. And the reason we're taxing you is not because we can, but because we have to switch our education system so that we are preparing people to be competitive in the new coming digital economy. We need to rebuild our infrastructure so that we have the logistic capability of delivering efficiently across all these areas. So we have to build an build a digital base of companies that can compete into the future, because these are high margin areas where you can pay large amounts of money because the productivity and the sales are there. The idea that you can go backwards and, in essence, recreate the industrial system that already exists. And remember, we're at capacity. The law of supply and demand says that if there's demand, there'll be supply. But if you create more supply, more manufacturing, what happens? There's competition. And generally, in that kind of competition, the ones with the best value and lowest prices are going to win. And that's not going to be the US. And even if they do win, margins will be squeezed. Profits will be down. They will not be able to pay big fat paychecks to American workers because they'll be under pressure to lower their costs. So, what Donald Trump is doing doesn't make sense. He's trying to go back to the past when there's very little money and profits in that area. I mean, to give you another example, yesterday, the Manufacturers Association came out and went to government and said, look, we have deficits, it's almost 100,000 people we can't find because they're not qualified to work in industry and our manufacturing. And yet Donald Trump is saying that he wants to create a manufacturing economy in the United States. Right? Only 40% of Americans can read above a sixth grade level. Does that sound that they're ready for the digital economy? Where is all this going to come from? And instead of, I can understand, he said, okay, we're going to have a big push, Sputnik moment. We're going to put increased emphasis on, STEM and making sure that we have the scientists and engineers and people who are ready to work in this new industry. No, he's dismantling the Department of Education. So everything he seems to be doing is at cross purposes. He's stuck in the situation where a weak dollar will, have horrible consequences for our debt. And yet, if he doesn't have a weak dollar, American products won't be competitive. I would even argue that there would have to be almost a 10-to-1, so that $10 would equal 1 in order to get the U.S. in a position where it can compete in terms of labor and offering things. If you'd had that happen, who's going to ever buy treasuries? Why? I don't need to take a loss like that. I mean, Peter Navarro has already said that the dollar needs to be devalued by 30%. Well, when you devalue the dollar by 30% and you buy 1/4, 25% of everything that you consume from abroad, you've just multiplied the effect of the tariffs. So you really are in a desperate situation. And who's being hit? Of course, consumers. You're now seeing people who are routinely going to grocery stores and they buy now and pay later. When they pay later, they're going to pay, on a yearly basis, 300 to 500% more. They've run out of cash. They've run out of credit. They're looking at losing their cars. They can't even afford to repair their cars because the parts themselves are subject to these tariffs and their money is worth less. What was worth $10 today is only worth $9. I mean, $10 two months ago is only worth $9. So you have to pay more and the tariffs on top of it. So America is looking at a desperate situation. Donald Trump doesn't know quite what to do about it. He doesn't want to look weak. China's trying desperately to figure out how they can ease the situation so he doesn't go to the military card. And that's always a danger because it's the last card that the United States have. That they start something to try to unify the country, have them absorb the kind of pain that Donald Trump is promoting. But that could cost lives. It could end the world as we know it.
Yeah, I think again, a key problem seems to come some of these trade deals from the early 90s as well. As you argue, this new international division of labor, that is, the US should do the tech and finance, and they accepted that a lot would be outsourced. Now, of course, there's a huge benefit, as you said, you outsource a lot of the production, assembly, and then and it's cheaper. So, but then of course your own people lose your jobs. So, in my opinion, in this critical time, especially in the early 90s when all of this was happening, the key assumption appeared to be, this is how a global economy readjusts. These people who each used to make cars and production, they will simply move into high-skilled, high income professions. They all become programmers effectively. But we saw the opposite happen. They all went to lower skilled, lower paid. So the people who made the cars, they well more or less ended up in Kmart instead, and you end up in a very, as you said, difficult situation. The middle class starts to get weakened. When there's no middle class, capitalism is seen as a relationship only by those who exploit and those who are exploited. So of course tensions begin to build up. So I do recognize that this wasn't sustainable, but I see. I very much agree with you. I think everything that's being done now is very counterproductive, and some of it appears to be because of just bad information. The whole idea that if America gets to have 30% tariffs on China, China only gets to have 10, then America wins. This is the tariffs is you mentioned the consumer cost. Of course, all of this cost paid by the importer is pushed on the consumer. So not only do you have higher prices for the consumer, but that's assuming that the imports are only the end products. A lot of times these are components also for, which goes into a supply chain, which means that the American end product will be more expensive and less competitive. So it seems like it is a real problem. But this search for easy fixes, and as you said, a lot of what America needs to do is, if you want to again reindustrialize, begin also with the education system. This has to be built over many years, as China spent many years. But this idea that you can just squeeze it into a 2-year period and bring America back on top, it's going to be very disruptive and very confrontational, because not only do you have to somehow reimagine your own economy to a point you can't do, but you also have to break the knees of the Chinese, and I guess
Not just the Chinese,
yeah,
everybody.
everybody, yeah, taking territories from the Danes, reorganizing the whole Western Hemisphere. It's quite yeah, dangerous. But my question is on how does China respond to this? Because irrespective of tariffs being pulled back, the reliability of the United States is not the same. And again, it's not just Trump. This is you had the economic war began with Trump's first administration, but it was only intensified under Biden. Again, this cutting China's access to semiconductors, for example, this was such a dangerous signal. This told the Chinese very directly in this way or indirectly that we're not prepared to live with you as an equal, and our objective is now to destroy your tech sector and your economic progress. This was a declaration of a Cold War. So, irrespective of Trump being gone tomorrow, or whoever comes next, America, the interdependence with America, which would be great for stability between the US and China and the wider world, but it's certainly not certain anymore. So, if you're China, what do you do? Because you can't accept this massive dependence on an unreliable partner. So where does Chinese exports go? Well, how does it reorganize its trading system?
Okay. Yeah,
Sorry, that
but
was a
it's not
very
just
long question. I apologize.
no, no. I understand the thrust of it. I mean, Donald Trump doesn't have long-term plans. I mean, for 18 years, he complained about healthcare. When he was asked shortly before this last election, "What's your healthcare plan?" He said, "Well, I have a framework of concepts." Really? Framework of concepts about something that you were president for one term? You talk about this every time, and you do not have anything to follow through. This is kind of where he is. But you talk about it, the unreliability as a China problem. It's greater than that. Europe has a problem with America's unreliability. So does South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, Central Asia. In fact, even Australia are turning away. And you've seen this quite clearly in the elections that have been held. Canada voted for somebody who's going to stand up for Canada. They don't want to be our 51st nation. I mean, 51st state. Canada was influenced by Donald Trump, despite his efforts to try to sway things. It didn't work. People, punished the party who had ostensibly been acting like Trump, but talking in the same way. So The world is reacting to an unreliable partner that they used to look to as a lighthouse, as an entity that was, in essence, showing the way, guiding them past dangers, supporting international institutions, supporting the rule of law, talking about human rights, all of these things. And now the world is topsy-turvy. Instead of talking about international rules and laws, he said, I'm just going to take Greenland, I'm going to take Canada, I'm going to take Gaza, and I'm going to take the Panama Canal. This is a complete 180 degrees. So of course, everybody has exactly the same problem. And no one wants to be on the, under the United States, under some sort of unequal bilateral agreement, which in essence says, you're gonna support me, I'm gonna extract from you, and don't expect anything in return. Just be thankful I'm not doing something worse to you. Yes, the United States is slowly isolating itself. And the question the world is considering individually and separately, individually and together, is whether they can live without the United States being the central part of American economy and political system. Not because they want to push the US out, simply because the US is pulling out. It wants all the benefits, but it doesn't want to have any of the responsibilities. We saw this with the USAID, and a lot of people are happy it's gone because for some, they saw it as a front for CIA activities for destabilizing countries. But the fact is, it was also delivering, things like AIDS vaccines in Africa. It was doing things to prevent outbreaks, offering polio vaccines and things like that to make sure that this doesn't become a problem again. And now that is gone. And it's symbolic of the fact that US, we just don't care. What you do is your business, but what we want is we want you to support our system and our way of life because we've been cheated. And I always find this somewhat odd. The richest, most powerful country on earth with the greatest military has somehow been cheated by countries that can't afford to feed their own people. How is that possible? And a lot of people are asking the same questions. So the real question here going forward is, since Donald Trump doesn't have a plan, how bad does it get? From China's perspective, as I said, the only solution that I've seen that seems to make sense to them is this phase 2 deal. Tie him to a deal so that if he walks away from it, it automatically punishes him. How he's going to deal with his debt problem, I do not know, because no, that is not something that China can influence. They're not interested in crashing the US dollar. They could have done that easily just by, over a couple of days selling their treasuries. It would have resulted in massive increases to the amount of interest. And that's still hanging over the head of the Fed. They're concerned about that. And then you have, Besant. He's an odd character. One time he was, still very friendly with Soros, who Trump regards as the devil, and who most of the Washington establishment, the neocons, see as an evil force that they're against. And yet he's working for Donald Trump. I mean, what is it? Was he a successful guy? Yes, he made $500 million, but his last couple of ventures, every time he's gone out from under the wing of Soros, he hasn't done well. Soros had to kind of pick up the pieces of his last thing, and all of a sudden now he's a politician. Does he have an answer? He should. But here's a guy who is complaining about financialization. This idea that you don't put money into companies, you bet on outcomes, like what's going to happen to different currencies if certain things happen, what's going to happen to the stock market if the Fed, changes rates. That's financialization. It's not helping companies build anything, giving them the capital to do it. It's just simply a casino. And he made a lot of money at this casino. And then a couple of weeks ago, he started talking about the evils of financialization. It reminds me of that movie, Casablanca, when the commandant says to Rick, he says, "Rick, I'm shocked to find that there's gambling going on at your place." And immediately the person in charge of things just says, "Oh, Commandant, here are your winnings." "Oh, thank you." So, I mean, it's become a caricature. If you stand back and look at what's happening, things. So China's in an odd position where it needs to save the United States, despite the fact that they're dealing with an 11-year-old child who's in essence throwing a tantrum on the supermarket floor. They can't walk away. There's too much at stake globally. So they're trying to find something. As far as I can see, this is the only thing that they really have. And they're hoping he takes it because he wants to declare victory. As I said, these other pressures are really, really going to hit him hard. He's pushing this $4 trillion tax cut that is unfunded, going through Congress as we speak. He's having great difficulty even convincing his own party that this is something they want, and they're generally real keen on tax cuts. They're saying this isn't sustainable. We can't just keep adding tax cuts onto the national debt. So he has a lot of issues. They all relate to his fundamental misunderstanding or lack of knowledge or pure ignorance regarding economics. The fact that he doesn't choose people who can advise him, he chooses people who will reflect whatever he says. The competence of his combined cabinet is extremely doubtful. Most of them came from television. They were pundits or they were on TV. They look great, right? But do they actually understand what they're doing? I mean, Pam Bondi, his attorney general, has said that they seized 22 million, fentanyl pills. She started out saying that it saved 25 million lives. Okay, well, it's a little stretch, but maybe. Then it became 110 at her next appearance, million lives saved. And then it became over 220 million. Well, the US only has 360 million people. But I mean, this was said with a straight face. These are the people that Donald Trump has around him. And that is what is scary. They reflect what he wants. They're all expendable. He can replace them in a second. The issue is he's not getting the information he needs. And as we saw in his first term, he doesn't like people giving him advice. He says, "You're holding me back. Right? Let Trump be Trump." Problem is, Donald Trump, as we know him, is a 6-time bankrupt. He's a convicted felon. He's been involved in all sorts of schemes where he's had to pay back tens of millions of dollars because of fraudulent activity that was alleged by those who sued him and by attorneys generals. He used his own charity as a money cover pit for his own vanity projects and to reward people to pay off his mistress's debts. I mean, mistress's payoff money. These are the kinds of things that should be bothering people, and eventually they will. Those supermarket shelves, department shelves, are empty and prices are rising. You're going to see a split in his base. Its base has generally been extremely solid at 30%. And they'll tell you, well, I don't understand what he's doing, but he's for me and I'm for him. All right. Pure faith statement. It's a cult. But when they start losing their homes, their cars, can't pay their grocery bills, you're going to see a split, and then they're going to go at each other. But this is not something to celebrate. Don't need more angry people in the United States. We have enough. We don't want them deciding that it's time to pick up arms because they're frustrated. We need somebody to calm things down. Fortunately, that kind of leadership isn't coming from within Washington. So China and the rest of the world is stuck with this problem. How do we talk him off the cliff he's wants to jump off? And it's very, very difficult. And you do have to appease. Look at he went to the Middle East saying, "Oh, trillions of dollars are coming to America." Well, not really. A lot of those deals are to be talked about, subject to market conditions. Will take 10 years, long after he's gone, to come to fruition, if in fact they do. And you've seen the same thing with companies. It's easier to appease Donald Trump and get out from under his hammer, tariff hammer, than it is to confront him and saying what you're doing doesn't make sense. The one hammer, though, that he cannot avoid, and that is coming, is, well, two hammers. One is the American public not happy with rising prices, lost jobs. I mean, go back last week, FedEx got rid of 20,000 people. 20,000 people who were earning between $45 and $65 an hour. These were family supporting wages. Now they're gone. And the logistics industry, the people who deliver things, they're expecting even more. Maybe 3 times that number of people will be laid off. So then you have the bond market. At what price does the U.S. go bankrupt because it cannot raise enough money? Remember, he's gotten rid of the large portion of the IRS, the people who are supposed to collect money. He's gotten rid of them. How long can the United States go on just borrowing money to pay its debts?
Yeah, no, beyond well, I think there's a dilemma because on one hand, they don't want to appease Trump too much either, and on the other hand, you want him to go away. But this seems like putting deals in place which won't actually develop for years. It seems to be a mutual beneficial thing. That is, they get, as you say, from away from underneath Trump's hammer, while Trump gets to declare a victory. But even if nothing will come from it, but besides trying to stabilize the relationship with the US, such as China trying to lock them into an actual agreement, there's also this need for or incentive to diversify, reduce the exposure to the United States. Only so, yeah, this morning that, for example, Colombia, they want to join in now on the BRICS Development Bank, just to again, so it is across many spheres. So it's the technologies, it's the dependence on industries and the supply chains, even the physical transportation corridors countries use. Their banks, of course, now with the BRICS and the currencies. So across the board, you see this. This is why the Chinese and the Russians developing this grain corridor, why they're having new commodity exchanges, all of these things being discussed, because you can't hope that America will be kind to you tomorrow. So, where do you see this going, though? When will this bring actual pain for the United States?
Well, I mean, there's two kinds of pain. One, once again, is consumers. It's going to take 2 months for all of the tariffs in place to really hit consumers hard. Because remember, in terms of Mexico and Canada, they're very immediate. Food prices are going up because things are more expensive coming from Mexico. Lumber is going to be more expensive because a lot of it's coming from Canada. Energy could be potentially more expensive because it was the cheap flow of energy from Canada that was helping the United States, right? So automobiles, they're in a shambles. They do stuff on both sides of the border. Down south in Mexico, they go back and forth. Auto companies, one part is done in Mexico, another part is done in the US. Everything that's done in Mexico is going to be tariffed. Everything that's done in Canada is going to be hit. So the auto industry isn't going to do well. And just remember, a year ago, they got a 30% increase in the pay package. Now, I'm not saying they didn't deserve it. They took a lot of, they gave a lot away during the financial crisis under the idea that when things got better, they would be rewarded. Instead, corporations rewarded themselves to the tune of 40% increases in their pay packets and benefits. The union said, look, that's not fair. We want our share. You promised us, you lied to us. So they finally got 30% after all those strikes, as you remember. But the problem is that didn't increase productivity. There's not, just because they got a 30% increase in their pay packet doesn't mean they're going to produce more cars. In fact, now the cars are more expensive. So, I mean, things are not working in the right direction. You're right. People are de-risking from the United States. I mean, and the irony here is that it was the United States who has been claiming you need to de-risk from China. They're bad people. They're going to do bad things to you. They're going to do debt trap diplomacy. Well, I can't think of anything that is more akin to debt trap diplomacy than America's debt bomb, because that is being supported to a certain extent within the United States, but to a large extent outside. If those things stop supporting it, you're going to see a spike in interest rates. When that happens, as I said, they don't have any means of paying it back. So where is the future? The future is, as I said, you have to manage the next 3.5 years. I hope people don't think that impeaching Donald Trump will somehow be a magical solution. I mean, I always think of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance as like in Star Wars, you have the Emperor, and you have Darth Vader. And you don't want Darth Vader becoming the Emperor. In J.D. Vance's case, the things that he said to Europe, things that he said about genocide in South Africa while ignoring the real genocide that's happening in Gaza. I mean, this is not the person you want in charge of the United States. He's an ideologue, and he's very, very closely associated to Palantir. He was all his political activities to this date have been backed heavily by one of the owners there, and he is determined to return to, voice the concerns of those things. You already see it now in government. The military is transitioning, and for good reason. They're transitioning away from tanks and howitzers and warships and aircraft carriers towards what they believe is more effective, which is electronic warfare, drones, and missiles. That isn't happening easily. American military-industrial complex is old, and it's deeply seated in the venues of power. Many generals, admirals, etc., as soon as they retire, they go on the boards of these defense industries, and they bring with them a tremendous amount of clout and access. And as a result, it's going to be a bit of a battle in between. Even the intelligence agencies have been hit. Donald Trump doesn't seem to care who he takes on. And these are very, very powerful forces that like to work in the background, in the smoke-filled boardrooms where decisions are made, and people end up dying or other nefarious things. So I'm not saying everything they do is nefarious. I'm just saying that they have made policy in America for a long, long period of time outside the bounds of the duly elected representatives who are supposed to be doing these things. So yeah, right now the future doesn't look great. There are problems. It's just nice to know that there are countries out there, and it's not just China. Brazil realizes this, Russia to a large extent. I mean, the BRICS have now become, in essence, responsible inheritors of a system that was broken by the very people who created it and were supposed to support it. Europe is somewhere in the middle. Can't seem to decide which way they want to be, where they want to go. At some point, they have to make a decision. And I'm not saying they go one way or the other. I'm saying they have to start thinking about Europe, what Europe needs to go forward. I would say it's very similar to the US, in the sense that it needs to put money into education and preparing its workforce for where there is going to be money, where there are higher wages. To give you an example of the hypocrisy of Donald Trump, he talks about manufacturing deficits as if that's the only thing out there. The fact is, the US runs a positive account surplus in terms of services. But, I'm surprised that countries aren't going out and says, well, US has an account surplus with services. Well, we need to put tariffs on those services because that's exactly the same logic that Donald Trump uses. So he's very simple. It's kind of like what he said about the drop in GDP. He says, anything bad is Biden's fault. Anything good is to my credit. I'd expect an 11-year-old to tell me that, but I don't expect a supposedly responsible adult to say things.
Now, I've seen this comments when the stock market goes down, it's Biden's economy goes up. This is Trump's economy, but of course, one can challenge the entire notion that only looking at the stock market is necessarily the healthiest indicator of the economy. But anyways, Einar Tangen, it's always great to speak with you, and yeah, I'll hope you
Thank you
come
for
back
having me.
on again.
Anytime. I would be absolutely delighted to be here. You have extremely insightful questions, and it's an honor to be on your program. I know you have a lot of very thoughtful listeners.
Thank you.